times. Eduardo. Yeah, Eduardo Zeiger. Do you remember? So anyway, so he was a big supporter of Rev Ginsburg here in L.A. He brought him many times, and he passed away this morning. No, it was coming, and I had a feeling that would happen when I was here. So tomorrow morning I'll go to the Levaya in San Francisco.
So this should be definitely a big schus for him.
So he's a Nishmas Eliezer ben Chana. I don't know his father. I don't remember his father's name. Anyway, but we were davening for a long time for him, so I remember his name. Okay.
Yes, I guess that's about it. Anybody else that would like to do any dedication for this year? It's always a big schus to have Torah studied, especially Torah from the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael and from the Pnimius of the Pnimius of Eretz Yisrael, of Rabbi Ginsburg's Torah and Chassidus that is being brought here by our very dear Rabbi Genuth and all of his. It was used to be Rabbi Genuth. Now we're getting a whole
slew,
Baruch Hashem, and we enjoy it very much over here at Mayam, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you, Rabbi Moshe, and thank you to all of you for coming. And let's go.
Okay. So first of all, thank you to Rabbi Wolf, who has given us so much hospitality over the last few years. And every time that I say someone's coming, he right away says, okay, bring him here to Mayan. So slowly, Mayan, I hope, is going to not just host us, but a lot more people. You probably have a lot of people, because it's so easy to come. It should prosper more and more and become a bigger and bigger kehillah. You should need a bigger place, and so on. And Hashem should give you more hours in the day, which is the biggest blessing. The biggest blessing of coming to Los Angeles is the flight over, because you have a long, long day, like 29, 30 hours. It's great. It's just, I wish every day was like that. Okay, so the topic tonight is about something that I'm not sure everyone is even familiar with, although I imagine the people that came have some familiarity with Isaac Asimov. To start the conversation about Asimov, I have to mention that he was a not so distant relation of the Rebbe's. How close was he? Was he a second cousin or a third cousin? I don't know, but he was a cousin. And the first time I heard this was from Rav Steinsaltz many years ago. We talked about their relationship. And Rav Steinsaltz told me then already that they had a relationship. They knew each other. And in different contexts, they had met and had spoken to each other. And later it was revealed that they had a correspondence. We don't have the correspondence. If it exists anywhere, it's still in archives. We haven't seen it. But thanks to various conversations that the Rebbe had over the years, we know a little bit about what he spoke to Asimov about. I bring this up because Asimov is from a Chabad family. It's not just that he's a relation. I'm not bringing it because we're playing Jewish geography, but because he grew up on many of the same concepts that Chabad speaks about. Probably the most important concept that he grew up about was the formation of a community, of a society. All of Chassidus is about that. You could say that Chabad is especially about Moshiach and Chassidus is also especially about Moshiach, but in general, the whole concept of Moshiach is very much related to the concept of creating a community which includes all of mankind. That's basically the idea behind it. Meaning, it's not to change the markets in New York. That's not what Moshiach is about. And Moshiach is very little about changing, let's say, global warming, if there is or isn't. It's not about those things. It's first of all about bringing people together. It's about creating a community out of mankind. And one might say that the big innovation in Chabad is that there's a different concept about community than there is in most other branches of Chassidus. And I would say it like this, that in other branches of Chassidus, the thinking is that there's Anash, there's our people, the people that are close to us, the ones that are in our extended community. And in Chabad, the concept is that everyone is Anash, the entire world. They just don't know it yet. So this is a very interesting thing, which like sort of says you're already part of the whole community. We just haven't met yet. We just haven't told you. Now, some people find this very overbearing and annoying even, because who made you bring me into, or like, Marx would, what's his name? Which one? Groucho Marx, I remember, would say, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me, right? So why? So some people just hear that and they already don't want to be, they don't want to hear about this. But that is the general thinking. And so when you understand Moshiach as creating community, as creating bonds between people and creating a network between people, then you begin, and that being the crux, maybe the spine of what Hasidus is about, even beyond the Torah, beyond the all these things are almost like instruments. They're vehicles. They're things that we use in order to create the community. And when you see that, we didn't remember your father's name, so we didn't know. We should have a l'chaim maybe later. So when you understand that that's what Moshiach is about, and what the Baal Shem Tov was about, and the whole social movement behind Hasidus to create these bonds, then that brings the whole story of Asimov's trilogy into a lot more focus. And now I'm going to say a few things about his trilogy called The Foundation. If you haven't read it, I read it when I was in my teens. I didn't reread it since then, but the story was very, very vivid in my memory. I didn't remember the details, so I had ChatGPT give me like a summary quickly. But I tried on the plane to read most of the trilogy. I got through most of it, not everything, but most of it. And I'm going to give you a short synopsis so that you can either get back up to speed, or if you've never heard the stories, first of all, I recommend reading them. They're very entertaining. He was a great writer. But I want you to understand the plot, the idea behind it. So we're going to hear the way that maybe it's a different AI that summarized it for me, so we could do this quickly. So Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, originally written as a series of short stories between 1941 and 1950. This is a very important point because he started writing it at the height of World War II. That has to be in the background. The Rebbe arrived in America, I believe, in 1941, right? 41, 42, what was it? 41. So he started writing, and they were almost the same age. And this definitely had a tremendous effect on Asimov. It had a tremendous effect on everyone here, World War II. And he saw this as, you could say, almost the resolution of wars. And we'll talk more about that as we develop our understanding of what he's done. So it was first published as 3 books, and those were 1950 to 1953. They're called Foundation, Foundation and Empire, and Second Foundation. These books, which received more attention than all of Asimov's other works combined, he said this, that he wrote over 300 books. And he said that everything else combined was not the amount of attention that Foundation got. So another reason to read it. If you go on any science fiction list of the most important science fiction books ever written, this is generally the first, second, or third. It's constantly. If you want to understand what this genre can do, let me say just one more thing. I'm saying so many things, so much to say about this. One of the amazing things that I heard from Rav Steinsaltz was, he told me if I had time, I would write a science fiction book. Because I believe he said this. It was out of the context of speaking about the relationship between Asimov and the Rebbe. He said that that's the genre that would allow me to explain what we're doing here much better than anything else. That's the way to go about it. Okay, he never did. Actually, he did. He wrote a science fiction book. It's never been published. I haven't read it either. I don't know if he was a good writer when it comes to stories or prose. These books, which received, so we said that, and regarded as seminal works in the science fiction genre, the trilogy explores the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire, drawing inspiration from historical events and philosophical ideas. So what the historical events are and the philosophical ideas that we'll discuss more in depth. The overarching narrative of the Foundation trilogy is rooted in the concept of the Galactic Empire, which parallels, guess what, the Roman Empire. And Asimov says himself, I read Edward Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, and that was some of the background from where he got this. This is going to be very important later on. He was influenced. How did he know this? Okay, I don't trust these AIs. I asked the AI a question, which I am sure no one ever asked him. Like, there's no way in the world anyone ever asked this question. And now I'm seeing it like worked into the summary that he gave me like 10 minutes ago. So I'm not going to read the next sentence because it's going to give away a lot. We'll see that later. The trilogy was conceived during the turbulent years of World War II, reflecting the period's sentiments about war and redemption. Let me say something about war and redemption. There's a very important quote in philosophy of literature. It says that any book you write about war is an anti-war book. Think about that. Any book you ever write about a war is, by definition, an anti-war book. Because you can never talk about war and leave a person wanting to participate. It's always the opposite. Whatever you write about war will automatically cause people to hate war. And that's probably why we love watching documentaries about wars. Because it's a sort of catharsis that we never want to go there. It's like letting go of this whole thing. We don't want this. Okay. The narrative begins, the first book, Foundation, introduces us to Harry Seldon. He's the prophet here, let's call him. A brilliant mathematician who has developed the science of psychohistory, a branch of mathematics that predicts the behavior of large groups of people. And Seldon, this guy, Harry Seldon, foresees the inevitable decline of the Galactic Empire and proposes the creation of two foundations to preserve knowledge and shorten the ensuing period of barbarism that will follow. And to give more detail, the Galactic Empire is 25 million worlds already, meaning it's spread through the entire galaxy. That's why they call it the Galactic Empire. And there's 25 million inhabited worlds. Humanity is everywhere. And it's been around for 12,000 years, this empire. And Seldon sees through psychohistory, through his calculations, that it's about to fall, to dismantle, to be destroyed in a couple of hundred years. And what he also sees is that there's going to be 30,000 years of barbarism until something new can develop. And what he asks himself is, what can I do? I can't stop the Galactic Empire from falling apart, but can I do something to shorten the period in between its fall and the creation of a new empire that will take its place? And that's a very interesting thing. The reason I say this is interesting, there are two tendencies in dealing with calamity. There are two ways to think about it. One way is to say, okay, there's going to be a calamity. How do I survive it? What do I do to survive? So when you think about something that's going to last 30,000 years, I don't know if survival is the right word. It's sort of like, how do you get through this? How can you get through this? Now, by the way, 30,000 years shouldn't be so scary to a Jew. Why? Because we've already been through this for 2,000 years. So we are in between, and there's no question in the world that that's what he's talking about. He's not just talking about the Roman Empire. He's also looking at Jewish history. And we have been through 2,000 years of this calamity, in between empires, if you want, in between stages of our development. And we've been stuck here for a long, long time. So how do you build something that will last, be able to survive these 30,000 crazy years of exile? That's one way of doing it. The other sentiment that a person can have is, I'm not interested in just surviving. It's Selden's sentiment, which is, how do I shorten the period? Maybe I can't get away from it entirely, but I believe in the human spirit and the ability to rejuvenate. And if I believe in that, the ability to rejuvenate, then maybe I can shorten the amount of time that we have to be stuck in this calamity. Now, in psychology, these are the two main currents today. And I talk a lot about this on my Patreon. There's a whole series on what's called positive psychology. I bring this up because let's call it the secular proponent of positive psychology, whose name is Martin Seligman. He was the man who changed the course of psychology. A lot of people don't know yet that he did, but he did. Psychology is not the same as it was before 2000, before he became the head of the American Psychological Association. It's changed course, and it's not going to go back to the way it was. It's going to take time for psychologists to figure this out, because people that are already trained are still using a certain method and a certain direction, a certain understanding. But positive psychology comes and says, how do I change the person? I can't change the disease. I can't change the course of what they're going through, but I can shorten or alleviate a lot of the symptoms by making the person resilient to them. And that's basically what this whole idea is about. And Martin Seligman, in one of his more autobiographical paragraphs, says, when I was a child, when I was young, and he read the foundation, he says, the foundation was the first time that I met this type of thinking, that you don't have to suffer just through something, you can actually do something about it. Now, why do I say this? Because today people are conditioned to suffer through something. What do I mean? They say there's not much you can do. The most you can do is take a pill, and it'll either help you or not, but that's simply not true. And in fact, the pills don't help. They only get you through it. It's survival. But it doesn't change the course of anything. And it certainly does not shorten the amount of time that you suffer. To change that, you have to be proactive. You have to do things. That's why it's called positive psychology. It means you have to take a stance of positivity towards things and decide that you are the master of your fate. The moment that you decide you're the master of your fate, everything changes. Now, it's not going to change in a day, because to become the master of your fate doesn't happen overnight. But it will change. And I can tell you from hundreds of people, and forget about hundreds of people, the whole direction really of this thing called positive psychology is the way that the Rebbe saw psychology. If you read any reference of the Rebbe to psychology, his most important, who is his most loved psychologist? Everybody knows by now, right? Viktor Frankl. This was not so well known 20 years ago. Even during the time that the Rebbe was in touch with him, people didn't realize how much he had taken or how much he had supported Viktor Frankl. What was Viktor Frankl? He's a Holocaust survivor who, a year after he came out of the camps, went back to his post in Vienna and started teaching again and rebuilt everything, and then started publishing. He actually lost his manuscript. He had the manuscript of his first book in his coat when he got to Auschwitz, and they took the coat from him, and he didn't have the manuscript anymore. But what happened was that they gave him a different coat, and inside the coat, he found a small inscribed note that had Shema Yisrael on it. He was not a frum person at all, but he took that as a sign. He was saying, God is saying to me now's not the time for what I was doing with my psychology. Now's the time to develop my faith. It's amazing, man. There's many stories, and it's worth in Wonders, which unfortunately doesn't get here often. The last 5 weeks, we had a continuing series on Viktor Frankl and the Rebbe. In any case, so let's get back to this. So Selden foresees this, and he says there's a way to shorten the amount of time that it will take to rebuild humanity. The narrative begins with the establishment of the first foundation on a planet called Terminus, a remote planet at the edge of the galaxy. The foundation's initial goal is to compile the Encyclopedia Galactica, a repository of all human knowledge. So that's what they think. He gets 100,000 people to be encyclopedists. So what they're going to do is retain civilization by cataloging all the knowledge. Now, if this doesn't sound familiar, then I'll spell it out. This is, and he even says it's a farce. It's not true. That's not their real purpose. Their real purpose is something entirely different. Their real purpose is to create a community. And the real purpose is not just to collect knowledge. Their real purpose is to live differently than the planets around them. So some of it is to retain knowledge, that's true, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is for them to have values and ideals that are different from those around them. What is that like? So that is 100% exactly what the Jewish people are like. On the one hand, we're encyclopedists. On the one hand, we deal with all this old knowledge, really old. I mean, the science in the Talmud is about 2,000 years old. It really hasn't been updated. Okay, we know a lot more than they did. Still, the value of it is not in the knowledge that it has. It's not knowledge per se. It's not the science per se. It's in the process of what it means to be a person engaged in dialogue. Most importantly, exactly the way the Talmud is, in dialogue with other people. So the knowledge is not something that is done in a closed lab, but rather knowledge is something that is shared and debated and thought about, and there's a process to it, and that process in the end creates a community not just of thinkers, but of people who have common values that are constantly under scrutiny. We don't take anything for granted. The first thing a Jew says is why? Why? Maybe it's not the same now. Maybe that's stagnation. Maybe just to go back to the Talmud all the time is stagnation. Maybe I need something new. Okay, I also believe we need something new, but I can't. I don't want to throw the past out. I want to keep the past, and I want to update it in a way that makes sense now. But that you can only create if you have people that are committed to being together under the guise of preserving knowledge. But we're really not preserving it. We're really trying to bring it into the modern world. Anyway, so this is what they do on Terminus in the beginning. They think they're writing the Encyclopedia Galactica, but as the empire disintegrates, the foundation evolves into a political and economic powerhouse, leveraging its technological advancements to gain influence over neighboring territories. Now that's the one thing that the Jews have not done, because we still haven't figured out how to build a strong enough society so that we influence those around us, but it's beginning to happen. Why is it beginning to happen? Because whether we like it or not, in the United States, the Jews are a political powerhouse, even though the numbers are not so great. But what Judaism stands for, and what the United States is supposed to stand for, although it doesn't always do it, are very close. And in many ways, the only thing that the United States has as its last chance at retaining the original values is if it reconnects through Yiddishkeit. But I don't know if Jews here, well, I know that some of them do, but I don't know if everybody realizes how important this is for the general well-being, not just of the United States today, but for the entire world. These values that we brought into the world, they've just been taken forward by the United States. It's a bigger society. It has more resources and so on, but it's still living the same values that we brought to the world. Where's democracy from? Where's this idea? Where does it come from? So Jefferson wrote very clearly where it came from. He made no secret of it. He said this comes from Judaism. Why? Because the Jewish people believe that every person has a soul. And if every person has a soul, at least the way he interpreted it, it means that every person is equal in the eyes of God. By the way, most societies did not think that. They didn't think that everyone has a soul. They thought that some people do and some people don't. But if you take that, even that small, that one value, justice, the concept that justice has to be something that rules the society. That comes from Yiddishkeit. Faith in God. Faith in God as a way to create community. I know when I was in grade school in Cleveland in the 1970s, and it was a cheder, and every day we said the Pledge of Allegiance. They don't say it anymore. I think they don't say it anymore. And what does it say at the end? One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So if you lived in the 70s, you know this. I don't know what's going on today. And the fact that people can't say this is why things fall apart at the seams, because these values, which come from Yiddishkeit, they're exactly what creates a just society. And it doesn't matter how you exactly think God is, but you have to believe that you're indivisible. You're indivisible the way God is indivisible. That's basically what they're saying. They're basically quoting the Navi who says that we are one nation in the land. And we say it every Shabbos afternoon. Okay, so let's continue. But really, you could see that almost everything that Asimov worked with, he took from his Jewish roots. And they weren't just roots. I mean, these were things that in Asimov's family, as secular as he was, they were things that were talked about and debated. So then there's the second book, and that's where we really want to go in the end. Foundation and Empire. The second book, Foundation and Empire, chronicles the further decline of the Galactic Empire and the Foundation's struggle to maintain its autonomy. The story is divided into two parts, the General and the Mule. The General focuses on the Empire's last attempts to reclaim its former glory, led by General so-and-so. Despite his military prowess, his efforts are thwarted by the inherent weaknesses of the decaying empire and the strategic brilliance of the Foundation's leaders. The Mule introduces a new enigmatic character, who Asimov said many times was his favorite character that he had ever created. And his abilities pose a significant threat to the Foundation's stability. Now, we have to take a step back and explain what psychohistory is in order to understand what the Mule is. Psychohistory, in this thing that Asimov invented, it doesn't really exist, but it sort of exists. If you follow Seligman and his ideas, then he says it sort of exists today when you talk about polling, for instance. Polling is close to psychohistory because you can't determine what a particular person is going to vote, but you can look at masses of people and know within a certain range what the voting is going to be like. So it's a connection between psychology and statistics, because you have to know how to ask the question the right way, and then you have to know how to compile the answers in the right way to get results that actually mean something. And we see that it's not an exact science because they're always off. But some of them are right. Some of them know how to ask the questions more properly, and some of them don't. A lot of them are still biased, so they ask the questions the wrong way. In any case, psychohistory is supposed to be able to predict what masses of people will do without knowing what any particular individual will do. So it's like statistics in that respect, but it's asking psychological questions about people. Now, Asimov was not a psychologist, and I don't think he knew very much about it. So he never gets into details because it's just a tool that he's using. But I would say that if there's anything that's interesting to someone who learns Chassidus, it would be something like this. How do I take the concepts that I learn in Chassidus, some of the most deep psychology that I could encounter in the world, and how do I apply it to understanding what people are doing? It's one of the most interesting questions. Can you take the teachings of Chassidus and turn them into a way to predict how people will behave? Now, I think there was at least one person, who figured this out to a great degree. And of course, referring to the Rebbe. He had an incredible ability to understand people, but I don't think it was anything near what it would have been if he hadn't learned Chassidus. That his learning of Jewish psychology gave him an incredible understanding of how to change people's minds, how to move them. Now, think about this. Can you name a single person in the world, I'm not just talking about a Jew, who who has been able to mobilize an army like the Rebbe without having any kind of authority. I certainly don't know an example of anything like this, even in history. But he had authority. He had tremendous authority. He came and made miracles. He came with some, let's call it a code that they had known, they had passed down all these years. And when someone comes and says these words, he's the chosen one. They had all kinds of signs. But here's a person who, at most, he has some authority over Chabad. What was Chabad when he took it over? It was 100 families, 200, 300 families in America. It wasn't anything of significance. How did he do that? When you think about the Rebbe, you have a concept of what might be either psychohistory or the Mule. What's the Mule? So now we get into the Mule. The Mule is what psychohistory does. It's the opposite of psychohistory. It's the opposite of using psychology to predict what masses are going to do without knowing what the individual will do, because the Mule has an ability to change and manipulate people's thinking. And he doesn't do it as masses. He does it one by one. So what he does is he goes to the centers of power and he changes, he manipulates, he telepathically changes the way people think, and he makes them into his servants. And that psychohistory could not predict, and it actually ruins the whole concept, because psychohistory, like statistics, is based on the fact that I don't care what any particular person will do. And here we have a person who has this mutant power to change and go against the masses in a way that nobody can predict, nobody can know. And now he wants to take over the galactic empire. And he wants to create his own empire. And to do that, he first of all, he attacks the foundation. And he goes into the foundation and he takes over the people who are running the foundation. Again, the foundation's the beginning already. It's been 300, 400 years. It's going to last 1,000 years until there's a new galactic empire. So they're well into it already. And they've conquered many worlds already. And he comes about suddenly and he manipulates them into following him. And so it looks like the end of Harry Seldon's plan, because there's no way that psychohistory could predict this, and no way you could do anything against this. So that's where we enter the second foundation. Seldon, when he set everything up, he said, I'm creating two foundations. Sort of reminds us of the famous joke about that when God wanted to create the world, it says that he asked the tzaddikim souls whether he should or shouldn't. And the tzaddikim said to him, they came one by one, they said, yes, you should create the world, you should create the world. When he came to the soul of the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe, should I create the world or not? The Rebbe took out $2 and he gave him two, and he said, make two worlds. This world and the next world. Kiflaim letushia. So Seldon got two for the price of one. He set up two foundations, not just one. And he said they're at opposite ends of the galaxy, but no one knows what the second foundation is. So in the third book, we slowly discover what the second foundation is. And strangely enough, and this is where it really gets interesting, I think, this first foundation, once it's able to, it thinks it's able to vanquish the mule. They do all kinds of things to get over him. They suddenly realize that their true enemy is not the mule. Their true enemy is the second foundation. Why? Because it turns out that there's someone competing with them. At first they thought they were in the background helping them, but now they come to this understanding, if there's someone like the mule, maybe what the second foundation is doing is it's also trying to make order in the galaxy. And they're going to be the rulers of the galaxy and not us. So they suddenly, they start searching for the second foundation. As it turns out, there was no reason to do this because the second foundation has a completely different purpose. What is the purpose of the second foundation? This was where, I think it really becomes interesting, is that everybody thought that Seldon had calculated everything 500 years ago. and he knows what's going to happen for 1,000 years. As it turns out, that's not true, because no one can see that far into the future. Nobody can calculate, says Asimov, that far into the future. So what is the second foundation doing all this time? They're actually the caretakers of psychohistory. They're continuing to develop his equations and to bring new data and to figure out how they need to change the equations to continue the plan so that the first foundation eventually takes over the entire galaxy. But they don't know this. They don't know that that's what they're doing. They think the second foundation is doing exactly what they're doing. And they're not doing anything with, they don't even know what psychohistory is. They've just heard there's such a thing. Now, this is pretty much the synopsis I'm going to give you. If you're really interested in read it, I mean, there's so much there. But I want to get into how this is related to us and start from this point. Yiddishkeit has two foundations, whether we know it or not. What do we call these two foundations? Okay, that's one option. That may have been the early iteration of it, but what do we call it today? The what? So it's a little bit like what Golan said, but you know. Okay, but I say within Yiddishkeit. Any ideas? The second foundation is hidden. Nobody knows where it is. So, yeah. So there's the Pnimius Torah and there's a revealed Torah. And when you think about, so people think, what is the revealed Torah about? The revealed Torah is supposed to create a certain type of world, a certain type of tradition, a certain type of action, a certain type of lifestyle. What is the Pnimius Torah? What is the inner dimension of the Torah doing? It's keeping it on track. But it's doing it in a very tricky way. Because it's sort of not part of the conversation of the Nigle, of the revealed Torah, but it's guiding the undercurrent all the time and keeping it true. In fact, at some point they combine to a certain degree, and we get the statement, which is not even from the Hasidim, it's from the Gra, from the Gaon of Vilna, who says, you can't be a posek if you don't know Pnimius Torah. That's a statement from him. Which means that if you don't understand the underlying framework, the philosophy behind things, or as Rav Steinsaltz would call it, that Kabbalah is the official theology of the Jewish people, if you don't understand what the point of the whole thing is, you can't really guide the actions that people take. But when you ask someone who's in the revealed tradition, a posek, not all of them, but some of them, and he asked him, okay, so what do you think about people who are in Pnimius? He says, oh, that's a bunch of, it's not relevant. It almost bugs them. Like, what? But when you look at it from the inside out, you say, in the end, what keeps everything true is not the halacha. It's actually that there's an undercurrent that's pushing the halacha in a certain direction. One of these is very clear direction that would never have come from the revealed tradition is learning Torah for women. Because the revealed tradition says this is something that's wrong. No good is going to come out of it. But from the concealed tradition, it's clear that that's the redemption. That's part of it. It has to happen. It has to be part of what, now, is it going to be that the woman needs to be a posek? No, that's not what it means. It means something else. But it means that she has to be just as educated. And it's her Torah just as much as it's the man's Torah. And Hashem is hers just as much as he is her husband's. There's a relationship about how it works. But it's still, both sides have to be developed. And if you only have one side and not the other side, it becomes lopsided and doesn't work. And the whole world goes out of whack. Everything is unbalanced. Not only that, when you get really into the Rizal's writings, into the writings of Rabbi Zakluria, you see that the undercurrent of his writings is what he calls the phases of the moon. And the moon represents femininity in the world. And it's the feminine that really goes through the transitions, through the changes. And when you talk about redemption, what is redemption? It's a redemption of the moon, of the feminine. It's always been about that, but we couldn't say that. So it's very interesting. The halacha almost ignores it, and yet the undercurrent, the second foundation that's running everything all the time, which is really pushing the developments, has this in mind. And that's where it's taking it. And it's ensuring, whenever it needs to change the course of the nigla. And again, the nigla, whoever's the nigla is like, oh, that's absolutely not true. We don't do it that way. Settle, okay? You say what you want.
Incorporating both together keeps everything in track.
Right.
This is the way to celebrate the holidays
Correctly, right. Proper seasons. But there, we still haven't reached back to defining the calendar using the moon, right? Because the original commandment is to base the calendar on the sighting of the new moon. And we still don't do that. We still use a calculated calendar. So at least openly, what we're doing is we're using calculations, which is more like the first foundation, which is all very logical and rational and scientific. And we're not using, as we'll see, the personal subjective experience, because to know to see the new moon yourself, that's a personal subjective experience. And we're still not based back on that yet. It's part of the feminine rising, that the new moon also has to rise again. Yeah. I love that. I didn't mention it. The number that Harry Seldon gives, 1,000 years, what do you think that is? Is that real or not real? It's not real. It's not real at all. The whole 6,000 year thing is not real.
I think so, but never known to go that.
Absolutely not. Nevuah, everything can happen today. There's absolutely no limit this way or that. The reason that they said 6,000 years is so that, again, it's some kind of intellectual construct that makes a lot of sense when you know the symbolism. But it's not telling you a historical fact before. That's not how things work. Because it's like somebody coming, like a patient coming to a doctor, and the doctor saying, well, look, and you know how good these premonitions are, how good these prophecies are. It's going to take 3 months of you doing this and that for you to heal. How does the doctor know? He says, oh, I have past experience. Okay, maybe you have some past experience, but every person's different, every situation is different. How can you know? So why do they even say that? Because they don't want you to fall into despair. It's going to take time. So they tell you 6,000 years, they say, look, it's going to take time. It's not immediate. But once you hit 4,000, what do they say? From the day you hit 4,000 years, the Moshiach can come any day. So you've already passed that a long time ago. So the whole thing of 6,000 is like 1,000. It's like sort of like telling you, put a limit on it. Don't try, on the one hand, it will take time. On the other hand, nobody can tell you when this is going to happen. It's going to happen the moment you're ready. And that moment can be any moment. So this whole thing of giving a time frame for something is not very serious in terms of the time frame. What it's serious is about playing with your psychology. It's what it wants. It's manipulating you. We've been there for a long time. That's what the Rebbe kept yelling and saying, I don't understand why it's still taking more time, because we've done everything there is to do. So this whole thing of 1,000 years is also very, when he finished the whole trilogy, it was only into about the year 400 or 450 and this, and people wanted him to write. He wrote, I think, 5 more books in the end. But he didn't want to continue because he said, this is how it has to end. Because it's not supposed to fill up 1,000 years. That was never the intent. The whole idea was that this gives you a sort of a psychological time frame for doing things, but trying to motivate you to do things as quickly as possible, but to also at the same time understand that they take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Right. So they told him 400 years. Hashem said 400 years. He only never said when you start counting. What does that mean? Yeah, it means I didn't really mean 400 years. I meant 400 years. You'll know at the end. It's the same game. It's exactly the same thing. You have to believe, that's what positivity is about. Positivity says, in Chassidus, there's a term for this that the Baal Shem Tov used to say is a mitzvahs aseh for a chassid. It's like a positive commandment in more ways than one for a chassid. So it's called zrizlut b'metinut, which means doing things quickly and with a sense of moderation at the same time. How can you do things both this way and that way? It says because on the one hand, you have to believe that you can do everything today. On the other hand, you have to understand that things take time. And you have to carry these opposites inside of you. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to rile you up and motivate you. And on the other hand, at the same time, to keep you normal and not about to break apart because it didn't happen today. So that
It's dopamine and serotonin.
at the same time. Or to put it another way, it's both your left and right kidney. One's pushing ahead and one's pulling you back, and everything's fine. That's how you have to be. That's where the tension really comes from. But it's everything you're doing, do it quickly, but understanding that it takes time. But I want to finish it today. Okay, but it takes time. But I want to finish it. And that's how you run between them. Okay, so I want to get into the most important part of all of this. It's the fall of the Galactic Empire. What is the symbolism here? So we mentioned Edward Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, that this was a strong influence on these books that he wrote. What does the Roman Empire symbolize in Judaism? So it's Esav, and particularly the way we understand the Roman Empire as Esav is the kings of Edom, the 7 kings of Edom that we read about in Parshas Vayishlach. And on the one hand, they give a lot of stability to the world, and it seems to be something that will last for a long time. And then you suddenly realize there's something missing here, and it collapses. It just keeps collapsing again and again and again and again until it breaks completely. So you have these 7 kings, and each one collapses in turn until eventually the whole kingdom is finished and something else takes over. Who takes over? Yaakov. When Esav finishes, then Yaakov takes over. So this is pretty much the whole symbolism behind this. He sees the Galactic Empire as being the Esav of the empire. Esav builds himself on power and strength, and this foundation that he's creating is going to be what replaces it, and it's going to be built on something entirely different. The question is on what is it going to be built? Now, before this sounds too far-fetched, I'll say that this was the crux of the correspondence and the interaction between the Rebbe and Asimov. This was the main thing they debated. What do you do in order to rebuild the world, to rebuild humanity under a different flag? What is it supposed to look like? That's the main question. Meaning, if the Jewish people are going to rebuild the world, what are our values that are going to make the world different than it was during the time of the Roman Empire? Now, again, here we need a little bit of history. In the way that Jewish history looks at the world, the only time that there was actually any order and peace in the world was during the Roman Empire. And since then, everything is a free-for-all. That's the way it's seen. And it's hard for us to understand this, although because we're coming close to it, but it's not the same thing yet. There's a famous thing that a citizen of the Roman Empire could travel from Gaul, which is France, all the way to India without anything in his pockets, and he would be taken care of the whole way as long as it took a year. I don't know how long it takes to walk that, or with a horse, or whatever it is. And he wouldn't need to do anything. Now imagine that you have an empire that's strong. Imagine the Western world is pretty strong, but nobody expects to be able to get on a plane somewhere and just travel wherever they want, and they don't need anything in their pocket. That doesn't make. There's nothing like that. We can't even begin to understand how ordered and peaceful the world was. There was no such thing as anybody would attack a Roman citizen. And they controlled the entire habitable world, or the entire civilization that existed then, or almost all of it. And so this level of order and peace hasn't been in the world since the Roman Empire collapsed. And since then, the world has been in barbarism. And it's, when did it happen? About the same time that we collapsed. So we collapsed